It's been 10 years since I last went on a job interview, but here I am at the age of 44, ready to dive back into what I love. My name is Jake Price, and I'm a mechanical design engineer. I'm new to the area, and truth be told, this company used to be one of my biggest competitors. I have a feeling they will offer me a job when they see what I bring to the table. Soon, hopefully, everything will fall into place, including my plan to rid myself of my cheating wife. I met Ella in 1993, and even now I can picture her back then, beautiful and brimming with confidence. I, on the other hand, was shy and introverted, thanks to being raised by a bossy, overbearing mother. My two older sisters, Megan and Anna, were no help either. They bullied me relentlessly throughout my childhood. Megan, the oldest, was 13 years my senior, and Anna was 10 years older. I was the mistake that supposedly caused my parents' breakup. My father left in 1977 when I was just 5 years old and never returned. It wasn't until recently that I learned the whole truth about his departure. "Come in, Mr. Price. It's nice to meet you." I was immediately struck by the cordiality of Robert Williams, the owner of Sutton Hydraulics. He was the exact opposite of the tyrant I was leaving behind. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Williams," I said politely, taking a seat in his imposing office. He sat across from me and began to speak. "I'm surprised you're leaving Walker Engineering, Mr. Price." "Please call me Jake, and I can't wait to get out of there," I replied, trying to sound casual. "They're doing a great job there, Mr. Price." "Jake, I'm sorry." He still looked confused. "I'm doing a great job, Mr. Williams," I corrected him. "Please call me Robert," he interjected. As I said, I've worked hard for the last 10 years, and my developments have moved the company forward, but I've received little thanks and even less respect lately. He looked at me seriously for a few seconds. I hadn't mentioned my personal situation and intended to keep it that way for now. "There's no doubt I want you here, Jake. I can offer you the package you asked for, which includes a substantial raise. But you also mentioned on the phone that if you could help us win a few more contracts, you'd like a commission. Is that correct?" He furrowed his eyebrows. "Yes, I hope it's not something illegal, Jake. I won't be involved in that," he said firmly. I raised my hand to assure him of my honorable intentions. "I interact a lot with our customers. I talk to them daily. I know what they pay for our products, and I know the contracts practically inside out," I began, explaining to an attentive Robert Williams. "How would anyone know that we offer more favorable terms? With my designs and your team, we can be the best in the game. What do you say?" I suggested confidently. He held out his hand, and I shook it, looking into his eyes and seeing a man of integrity. Another part of my plan was accomplished. Now, back to dealing with my cheating wife, Ella. We met at Kingston University in South London. She was in her final year of a creative writing degree, and I was completing my master's in mechanical engineering and design. As I said, I was too shy to approach her, and she had never lacked attention from men. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall, with brown hair and big brown eyes, the kind of woman you could get lost in. She had a beautiful body, but I knew she was beyond my reach. All the guys that ran after her were outgoing and popular. To my surprise, one of her friends started talking to me at a party, and Ella came over and joined us. I had little experience with women, and I think my modesty and shyness made me attractive to her. I worked up the courage to ask her out, and we started dating. I'm not ashamed to say she took my virginity. But after about 6 months of dating, I heard rumors that she was sleeping with other guys. I had no way of proving it and was too afraid to confront her. Ella was a spoiled child. Her parents indulged her and her sister Caroline, and for most of our relationship, I had to endure her acting like a princess. If things didn't go her way, she would make a scene and wasn't shy about causing trouble in public. It confused me. My friends couldn't stand her and thought I should break up with her, but I was in love, and I had never experienced anything like it before. When we graduated, we both got jobs and rented an apartment near Southampton in Hampshire. Her family was from there, and I had long since stopped having anything in common with mine. We married a year later, and the following year, Sophie was born, followed by Ava a couple of years later. Ella loved being a mom, and everything between us seemed great. I was promoted several times, and 10 years ago, I started working for Walker Engineering. Pay raises and bonuses helped us save up for a better house. But like most people in the world, 2008 was a bad year. The economic downturn meant that many people lost their jobs. It became harder to secure contracts, so we all had to step up our work and put in longer hours without any extra pay. It was during this time, when both girls were in high school, that I realized Ella was having an affair with someone from our old university. I was so focused on work that by the time it was over, I never realized who it was. My best friend Toby thought it was a guy from her class who had moved nearby. I brought it up to her one day, and she just laughed in my face, telling me to stop being stupid. But I knew she was lying. Despite everything, I managed to keep my job and maintain a good salary, which allowed us to buy a nice house. Ella had always demanded a house that matched our status, whatever that meant. As always, I relented, and we bought a nice detached 5-bed house in Southampton. It was a buyer's market at the time, so we got a good price, although the mortgage was a bit high. The only thing I did out of line was to open a new savings account in my name only. I started siphoning small amounts of money from our joint account into this new one. I told myself it was for emergencies, but deep down, I knew I was preparing for the inevitable. The affair had shaken me to my core, and I needed a safety net. As the years went by, I continued to add to the account, all the while maintaining the facade of a perfect marriage. Now, standing at the threshold of a new job opportunity, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. This job could be my ticket to a fresh start, away from the lies and betrayal. But first, I had to confront the reality of my situation and decide what to do about Ella. As I prepared for my interview, I couldn't shake the thought that my new life was just within reach. All I had to do was seize it, open a new savings account in my name only. I only put my year-end bonus into it, and since I was the sole breadwinner and in charge of all the finances and banking, I don't think Ella would have known about it, even if I'd waved the receipts in her face. In retrospect, it turned out to be one of the best things I could have done. I needed protection because I wasn't sure if Ella was planning on leaving me if the old lover ever came back. After that, things went back to normal, and the girls were always my top priority. I encouraged them in their studies and tried to spend a lot of time with them on weekends. In fact, I was the one who took them to dance classes, concerts, and the zoo more times than I can remember. Ella always seemed too busy on her coffee dates with her other spoiled and lazy friends. I rarely socialized with other husbands, but we all seemed nepotistic and subservient to one degree or another. My friends would sing me the Rolling Stones song Under My Thumb when I had to cancel plans in favor of something Ella wanted to do. Even at work, the guys on the factory floor made comments about my marital status, especially Ella's control over me. It was only a few months ago that everything fell into place. Ava had just left for university, and for the first time in 18 years, Ella and I were alone. Both girls went to our old alma mater, and as I was finishing unpacking Ava's things in the apartment she would be sharing with her sister, she turned to me and asked why I was even with their mother. I was stunned, for she had always been such a quiet girl like her old father. "Daddy, I heard she's hanging around with Henry Walker at your company," Ava said. I can still remember the tears in her eyes when she spoke. It was news to me, but I wasn't surprised. All these years I could have investigated her adventures, but I never did for fear of breaking up the family and having my girls suffer for it and resent me like my sisters resented my father. I let her cuckold me because the alternative did not bear thinking about. I still loved her, but I loved what we had created even more. This news made several impressions on me. First, I realized for the first time that the level of hostility my girls felt toward their mother was much higher than I had imagined. They loved and respected me, but I knew they were disappointed that I hadn't taken a tougher stance toward Ella. Secondly, it made me remember the old feelings I had for the women in my life while growing up and how that contributed to my weaknesses. And finally, I realized that at work the employees openly talk and laugh at me, most of all at Henry Walker, who turned out to be the nephew of Jack, the owner of the company, and the man I was cuckolded by. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't take it anymore, especially now that my youngest daughter had found out about how Ella was making fun of me. My heart was racing as I sat at the kitchen table waiting for Ella to come home. When she finally showed up, I found that I couldn't keep the anger and betrayal bottled up any longer. "Ella," I started, my voice trembling with pent-up emotion, "we need to talk." She looked at me with a mix of annoyance and curiosity. "About what?" "About us, about Henry Walker, about everything." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear. "What about Henry?" "I know about the affair, Ella. Ava told me she saw you with him." She tried to laugh it off. "Ava's just a kid. She doesn't know what she's talking about." "Don't lie to me," I said, standing up, my voice rising. "It's bad enough you've made a fool out of me all these years. Our daughters deserve better, and so do I." For the first time, Ella was speechless. The realization that I was no longer willing to tolerate her behavior seemed to hit her like a ton of bricks. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm leaving you, Ella. I've already started putting money aside, and I'm going to file for divorce. The girls are old enough to understand, and they deserve to know the truth." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel any sympathy. This was the moment I had dreaded and anticipated for so long. "You can't do this to me," she said, her voice breaking. "What about our life? Our home?" "It's all just stuff, Ella. What matters is that we can finally stop living a lie." With that, I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. I knew it was the beginning of the end, but it also felt like the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to rebuild my life on my terms. As I prepared for my new job, I felt a sense of liberation. This was my chance to start over, to be the person I wanted to be, without the shadow of Ella's betrayal hanging over me. And I was ready to seize it. Talk anymore. She just looked at me with what I might call apathy and contempt. She didn't say anything as she put her bags away in the closets. Finally, I spoke up. "Are you having an affair with Henry?" She turned to face me, blushing slightly, but answering without hesitation. "I wouldn't call it a romance, darling," she said. I was shocked by her confession and waited silently for her to explain why sex with another man didn't count as an affair. "You're a wonderful person, Jake. You're a great provider and my best friend. But there are things you can't provide for me, and I'm not ashamed to say I want all of it," she said bluntly and openly. "So you're cheating on me," I said, feeling discouraged by her brazen approach to infidelity. "Only with my body," she said, "not with my heart or my mind, Jake. Those belong to you." My head was spinning and my stomach was knotted. The sheer audacity of her words left me speechless. "I've never turned you down for sex, Jake, and all I do is explore with a couple of young guys," she admitted. "What?" I shouted, unable to contain my disbelief. My reaction took her by surprise. She walked around the table and took the seat across from me. "Don't yell at me, Jake," she said, regaining her composure. "You admitted to cheating on me with 2 guys, and I'm supposed to keep quiet?" I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. "I love you, Jake, but this is how it's going to be. Deal with it, or I'll leave and be with them," she said, giving me both a threat and an ultimatum. I just sat there, looking at her as her face softened. For a minute, I thought she saw the hurt on my face. "Everyone does it these days, Jake. My girlfriends have had affairs with younger men, and they say it makes for a better marriage," she added. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind raced back to all the times I had bent over backward to make her happy, only to be met with this betrayal. The room felt like it was closing in on me, and I struggled to breathe. "So you think this is normal?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You think this is what a marriage should be?" She sighed, as if exasperated by my inability to understand. "It's not about normal, Jake. It's about what works. This works for me, for us. You get to keep your perfect life, and I get the excitement I crave. What's so wrong with that?" "What's wrong with that?" I echoed, incredulous. "Everything, Ella. Everything is wrong with that. Marriage is supposed to be about trust, fidelity, and love, not just convenience and selfish desires." Her eyes narrowed. "You're such an idealist, Jake. Maybe that's your problem." My heart sank. I realized at that moment that there was no reasoning with her. She had made up her mind, and nothing I said would change it. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling weak. "I can't live like this, Ella. I won't live like this," I said firmly. "Then maybe you should leave," she replied coldly. I turned and walked out of the room, my mind made up. This was not the life I wanted, and I deserved better. My daughters deserved better. I went to my study and closed the door behind me, feeling a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in years. It was time to take control of my life again. The first step was leaving Ella and starting fresh. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. I sat down at my desk and began drafting my resignation letter for Walker Engineering. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally be free from deceit and start living authentically. She said. I was shocked. I had a hard time taking it all in before, and now Ella was actually trying to justify her cheating by telling me that all her friends were cheating too. As for her opinion that it would make our marriage better, it was dismissive at best. She didn't care about the marriage or me, only the comfort and security I could provide. I spoke again. So I can have another woman. Is that what you're saying, Ella? She stared at me for a few seconds, then laughed in my face. I sat in silence as she continued to laugh, trying to pull myself together. Yes, Jake, she said, her laughter subsiding into a mocking smile. Come on, be serious. You have trouble talking to women you've known for years. What chance do you have of talking to someone else? Her words cut deep. She was blatantly mocking me, and I felt embarrassed and ashamed, but she wouldn't give up. That's the way it's going to be, Jake, so don't ruin a good thing. I'm still your wife. I still love you, and I still come home to you every night. Don't ruin your life, don't complain about it, and don't do something you'll regret later, she said, her tone filled with a twisted kind of logic. She left me at the table, thinking about what had just happened to my life, to my world. She talked so openly about her affairs that I realized she didn't care about me one bit. I didn't care that all her friends were whores, but that didn't give her the right to be one. Not only that, but she had the nerve to threaten me. I was angry, very angry. That night, I slept in the spare room, unable to even look at her. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, my emotions a whirlwind of betrayal, rage, and sadness. The realization that Ella didn't care about the marriage or me hit me like a ton of bricks. Her complete disregard for my feelings and our vows was unbearable. The next morning, I got up early and went downstairs to clear my head. I couldn't face Ella, not after what she'd said. I needed space to think, to plan my next move. I couldn't let her walk all over me any longer. I decided to go for a walk in the neighborhood, hoping the fresh air would help me calm down. As I walked, I thought about my daughters. They deserved better than this. They deserved a father who stood up for himself, who wasn't a doormat. When I returned home, Ella was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She didn't look up as I walked in. I decided not to speak to her. I had nothing left to say. I went into my study and closed the door, feeling a sense of determination building inside me. This was the final straw. I couldn't continue living like this. I had to make a change, for my sake and for my daughters. I spent the rest of the day looking into divorce lawyers, gathering information, and making plans. It was time to take control of my life and put an end to this toxic relationship. Ella could have her affairs and her so-called freedom, but I wouldn't be a part of it anymore. That night, I slept in the spare room again. My mind was clearer, my resolve stronger. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to fight for my happiness and my dignity. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would no longer be controlled by Ella's whims. The next morning, I called a lawyer and set up a consultation. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. I was finally taking steps to reclaim my life and build a better future for myself and my daughters. I couldn't be near her, but around midnight, Ella woke me up and asked why I wasn't going to bed. Was she really that deluded? I knew she was a spoiled bitch, but this was beyond comprehension. Come on, Jake, get over it. That's the way the world works now. You're just acting like an old man, she said. I didn't respond. I could sense her presence on the landing, peering into the spare room. Oh, suit yourself, Jake. You'll be back in bed soon, I know it. You don't deny me anything, and you know as well as I do that I'll get my way, she said confidently. The sad part was, she was right. What had I done in 22 years of relationship that would indicate anything other than my unbridled devotion and willingness to go along with whatever she said and wanted? It was common knowledge that I was on her payroll, and now it was common knowledge among her friends and my coworkers that I was also a cuckold. I couldn't sleep a wink, so I decided to go downstairs and watch TV. There was a show on about celebrities tracing their family tree, and while much of it flew past me, it got me thinking about my own family. I had no contact with my mother or sisters, but I started to remember my father. I recalled so little about him. Did he have a family? I wondered. Why had he left? Was it, as my mother said, that he had abandoned us? Before I left for university, I found out from my brother-in-law that my father had died years ago, but my sisters denied knowing. It was then that I decided to cut them out of my life. The next day, I was up and out of the house before Ella even got out of bed. Thoughts of what she had said to me were still swirling around in my head, and I was desperately trying to focus on something more positive to get through the day. I started thinking about the TV show from the night before and decided to make some inquiries about my father. The girls didn't need me as much anymore, and my wife was sleeping with God knows who, so maybe getting answers about my father would help me and occupy my time. Good morning, Jake. I turned to see who was talking and faced Henry Walker. The smug look on his face, as if he were ready to burst into laughter at any moment, made my blood boil. I just stared at him and said nothing. "How's your wife doing?" he asked, openly mocking me. I heard a few giggles from the grown men at the coffee machine. I just stared at them as they stood their ground. I walked past them as they continued to giggle at my expense. I felt like the whole world knew my business, and even my boss's secretary, Olivia, seemed to find my situation laughable and open to ridicule. "Can I offer you anything, Mr. Price?" she asked, barely suppressing a smirk. "Maybe a couple of balls," I snapped back, looking directly into her eyes. "What did you just say?" she asked, her tone turning serious. "I told you there were no calls," she said, trying to regain her composure and suppress a laugh. I walked into my office and sat down at my desk. My day had started off terribly, and it didn't seem like it would get any better. The humiliation and betrayal weighed heavily on me. But I resolved to find some answers about my father. Maybe uncovering the past would give me the strength to change my future. With a deep breath, I began searching online for any clues about my father's past. Every keystroke felt like a step toward reclaiming my own identity, away from the shadows of Ella's infidelity. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to start somewhere. This journey into my past could very well be the key to unlocking a new future, one where I finally stood up for myself and took control of my life. Off to the worst possible start, and now I was a laughingstock both at work and at home. I tried my best to focus on my project, but the anger inside of me wouldn't subside. I decided to start looking for my father. All I knew was that he was born in Cambridgeshire and left us at the age of 38 in 1977, so I started looking for family history websites in the area. After a 30-minute search, I found that there were 14 people in Cambridgeshire named James Price, born in 1939. I knew that he might have died a few years before I went to university, so I was able to narrow it down to 3 possible people. I decided I didn't have time to search for each of them individually, so I posted messages on genealogy websites in each of the towns I found. As I sat in my office reflecting on the past 24 hours, I received a call from my boss, Jack. He wanted to talk to me in his office. Jack was a successful and wealthy man, but in his 60s, he had been married 3 times. He was a cheater and a bully. He was one of those power-crazed types who demanded respect but gave nothing in return. Many times in the past, I had considered leaving, but he always convinced me to stay, and yes, the money was the best in the area. The only thing I knew about him was that he was sleeping with his secretary, Olivia, behind his 3rd wife's back. "It has come to my attention that your wife is playing a trick on you, Jake," he said sharply. "With your nephew," I snapped back. "Well, yeah, he's a temper guy. It runs in their family," he said, laughing when I stopped talking. "But that's what I want to talk to you about. I don't want this to affect the business, and family comes first for me, Jake. So if you get in trouble, you're the one who has to leave the company. Is that understood?" He spoke to me like an old-school teacher punishing a child. I bit my lip as his impatient secretary, Olivia, hovered by the door. She was no doubt gathering information to pass on to her friends at the factory. Turning to leave, I wondered why a young woman like her would stoop to having sex with a dirty old man like Jack Walker. As I walked past her, I heard the giggling again. I lowered my head and walked out. As the door closed behind me, I heard explosive laughter that was clearly directed at me. As I returned to my office, I realized that being here was not doing me any good. I had paid for my girl's education, and now all I was doing was funding my wife's infidelities. I was a pretty simple person. I liked my gadgets, but I could live without a big house. Most of my living expenses were Ella's indulgences, weekly visits to the hairdresser and manicurist, her car and phone, and other unnecessary luxuries. I was usually happy at work. It was my place to be creative, and I was very successful. I was the one who designed many of the parts that were manufactured and sold here, and I was sure I could find work elsewhere. They just thought I was too weak, and they were right. I was not the confrontational type and never made waves because I was content. I was good old Jake, a humble engineer that people could get around. I looked at the splash screen with a picture of the family on vacation, clicked my mouse, and my email page opened. Waiting for me was a message from a woman named Elizabeth Carter. She had responded to my post on a genealogy website. Dear Jake, I believe we might be related. My grandfather, James Price, was born in Cambridgeshire in 1939 and left his family in 1977. I've been trying to piece together his life and would love to exchange information with you. My heart skipped a beat. Could this be the connection I had been searching for? I replied to her message immediately, hoping to uncover more about my father and perhaps find some solace in the midst of my crumbling marriage. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. I exchanged several emails with Elizabeth, each one revealing more about the man who had left me so many years ago. It turned out that he had remarried and had another family. He had passed away a few years ago, but knowing about his life brought me a sense of closure. Meanwhile, I was preparing for my escape from Ella. I consulted with a divorce lawyer and started planning my financial future. I needed to protect myself and my daughters from the fallout. The realization that I could start anew, free from the toxic environment that had become my life, was empowering. One evening, as I sat at my desk sorting through the documents the lawyer had sent me, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. My marriage was ending, but so was the constant betrayal and humiliation. I was taking control of my life again. The final straw came when Ella returned home late one night, reeking of alcohol and perfume. She stumbled into the house, barely acknowledging my presence. I couldn't take it anymore. "Ella, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked at me with a mix of irritation and confusion. "What now, Jake?" "I'm filing for divorce," I said bluntly. "This marriage is over." For a moment she seemed shocked, then she shrugged. "Fine, do whatever you want." Her indifference was the final confirmation that I had made the right decision. The next morning, I handed her the divorce papers. She signed them without a second glance. As I left the house that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was the beginning of a new chapter. I had reconnected with my past and was ready to build a better future for myself and my daughters. It was time to start living my life on my own terms. Named Jennifer Holmes from the Cambridge Genealogical Committee. I was stunned at how quickly they responded. I clicked the button and read the message. I was shocked. Jennifer had read my post asking for information about my father and had contacted a woman who claimed to be his niece and had been on the same site many months earlier researching her family tree. Her name was Rachel Murray, and she was my cousin. I sent Jennifer my number and asked if Rachel could contact me. I left work feeling uplifted. As soon as I walked through the door, I could smell dinner cooking. I left my bag in the hallway and walked into the kitchen to find Ella busy cooking. We managed to mutter a greeting but ate in silence. During dinner, Ella kept trying to make eye contact with me, but apparently she realized I was still angry. Until tonight, I hadn't been able to last a few hours without confronting her or letting her get her way. She finally broke the ice. "Can we talk about last night, Jake?" she asked meekly. "What's there to talk about? You explained everything perfectly last night. I'll either accept it or I won't, right?" I responded. For a few seconds, she looked at me with what seemed like regret, but it didn't last long. She took a deep breath, cleared her throat, and continued, "You're a great husband, and you've never turned me down for anything, so please don't turn me down, Jake." She was almost begging, as she always did, to get what she wanted. "If I'm so great, why cheat on me? Why make a fool of me?" I asked honestly. She panted and just brushed me off. She had no answer. She was just being selfish, and I was getting more and more tired of it. I couldn't do anything to make her happy anymore. How many hours had I worked to pay the bills and give her everything she wanted, only to be met with disrespect and ridicule? I drive a 12-year-old Range Rover while she drives a car that's less than 2 years old. "Listen, Jake, I have needs, and you just can't fulfill them. So either you can handle it like I know you can, or I'll find someone who can." "You mean Henry Walker?" I interjected. "Yes, Henry and I are lovers," she admitted. "He's actually your boss, Jake, and one day he'll take over the company from his uncle," she said bluntly. "So he's giving me what I need in bed right now, and if you don't relent and agree, I'll leave you, and he'll give me everything else I want and need." I didn't say anything, as usual. I just got up from my seat and walked into the office. I really wanted to hit someone or something, but instead I sank into my chair and screamed into my hands. Tears came to my eyes, and I wanted to be anywhere but here and now. I found a tissue and wiped my eyes when the phone rang. I picked it up and heard an unfamiliar voice on the other end. It was Rachel. We talked for about an hour, and when I hung up, everything else went out of my head, and a huge smile appeared on my face. Rachel was thrilled that I had decided to look into our family history. She told me stories about my father that I had never known, painting a picture of a man who had been deeply flawed, but also loving and caring in ways I hadn't imagined. Talking to Rachel felt like a lifeline, a connection to a part of myself I had long neglected. It gave me hope and a renewed sense of purpose. I realized that despite the chaos in my personal life, there was still so much to explore and discover about who I was and where I came from. I knew that dealing with Ella and her betrayal would take time, but for now, I had something positive to hold on to. As I sat back in my chair, the events of the past few days didn't seem so insurmountable. I had a newfound strength and a determination to rebuild my life, starting with the pieces of my family's past. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of a journey toward healing and self-discovery. To find out about my father and had a lot to tell me. She was talking at 100 miles an hour, and I was having a hard time absorbing everything she was saying. I learned that my mom had actually kicked my dad out of the house and had lied to me my entire childhood. Sadly, he died in 1983 when I was only 11 years old. He died of alcohol poisoning, and his mother, my grandmother, always blamed my mom for his temper and mental state after he left us. Rachel told me that he really wanted to come back into my life, but was prevented from doing so. We arranged to meet up this weekend at her house in Cambridge. I was excited and knew the break would be good for me. The rest of the week dragged on. Everything was the same at home, but at work, I was constantly being laughed at behind my back. Henry and his buddies thought it would be funny to hang a pair of panties on my office door. I looked at Olivia, but she didn't say anything. Inside the panties was a note that said, "Please go back to your wife." I was broken. I sat at my desk that day and cried. I wanted to blame everyone but myself. I was glad when Saturday came. I told Ella I was going to visit a friend in London, and she didn't care what I was doing. I guessed that she would mock me, so her absence made it easier for her. The drive to Cambridge was a stressful one. The M25 highway proved to be a nightmare as usual, and I ended up finding Rachel's house an hour after I was expected. This didn't seem to faze her as I was greeted with the best hug I've had in years. I was introduced to her husband Greg and 2 young children, Grace and William. Once the formalities were over, we moved on to talking about my father and my new family. Rachel had such a warm, unselfish personality, and she and Greg were interjecting and finishing each other's sentences. I think they were both eager to share our family's story. During my stay there, we were joined by David and Lucy Price. He was my cousin and Rachel's brother. We got along very well, and he added everything he knew about my father and family. After lunch, We went on a little trip where I had some time to think. When we got back, David and I talked about work and family life. He could tell things weren't going well, and for some reason, I confided in both of my new cousins. They just told me not to put up with it and that they would support me if I needed anything. I was so grateful to them. I left Cambridge with a new perspective on things. I had been told so many lies and treated so badly throughout my life that realizing I had a completely different family who had shown me more kindness and honesty in one day than most people I had known my whole life gave me hope. I needed to sort my life out and get back to being happy, not just for myself, but for my girls, my friends, and my new family. By the time I got home, it was 8 o'clock in the evening, and Ella was just about to go out. "Where are you going, Ella?" I asked. "Out with friends," she replied nonchalantly. "You mean Henry or Max?" I snapped back. She turned and looked at me with a mix of surprise and irritation. "What difference does it make to you?" she said defensively. "It makes a lot of difference, Ella. I deserve to know who you're spending your time with," I retorted, my voice firm. She rolled her eyes. "Fine, Jake. I'm going out with Henry. Happy now?" "Not really," I said, feeling the familiar sting of betrayal. "But at least you're being honest for once." She sighed and grabbed her purse. "Don't wait up," she said coldly as she walked out the door. As I stood there watching her leave, I felt a surge of determination. This was it. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a marriage filled with lies and infidelity. I had to make a change, not just for me, but for my daughters and my newfound family. I spent the rest of the evening making a plan. I would speak to a divorce lawyer on Monday, start the process, and finally take control of my life. The kindness and support I had received from Rachel, Greg, David, and Lucy had given me the strength I needed to move forward. It was time to break free from the toxic environment that Ella had created and build a better future for myself and my daughters. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of peace and resolve. For the first time in a long time, I had hope. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head on. This was my chance to start anew, to reclaim my happiness, and to create a life filled with love, honesty, and genuine connections. She looked at me, somewhat taken aback that I knew the name of her other lover. I gave her an understanding look. "Please don't do this again, Jake," she begged, seemingly indifferent to my feelings. "Please, Ella, I'm asking you to stop this and become my wife." "Stop being silly, Jake. I'm your wife and always will be. Don't deny me my pleasures, and I'll make your life easier. I'll back by midnight." She completely ignored my wishes and continued to threaten me. She approached me with her arms wide open, and I turned my back to her. She said nothing to my blatant insult, just picked up her Prada purse and headed for the door. "Ella, as your husband, I'm asking you not to do this." My voice grew harsher. She stopped where she was and looked at me, as if questioning who this new, assertive Jake was and what gave him the right to talk to her like that. It only lasted a second before she burst out laughing. "What are you going to do, Jake? Leave me? You'll never have the courage to do that. We both know you'll always be by my side." I was mortified. I lowered my head as her words echoed in my mind. "No balls. Deny me my pleasures." I always knew she was a spoiled brat. Her parents made sure of that. I knew I treated her like a queen while I was the workhorse. I knew she was selfish, but I always believed she loved me more than anything. I knew I was a fool, and I knew I'd been one for too long. This had to end, and I needed to make plans to make it happen. I wasted no time and got down to business. In fact, I started while Henry or Max was making love to her. Perhaps they were doing her together. Perhaps that's what she meant when she said she enjoys having her cake and eating it. I provide her with security, protection, and material goods while two young arseholes do what they want. The thoughts were driving me mad. I logged onto my computer and started looking for divorce lawyers. The search was empowering. I found a reputable firm and set up an appointment for the next day. I also started gathering financial records, making copies of important documents, and planning how to protect my assets. This was going to be a battle, but I was ready. That night, as Ella came back after midnight, reeking of alcohol and another man's cologne, I was more resolved than ever. I watched her stumble into bed, and instead of feeling the usual mix of rage and despair, I felt a strange calm. This was the beginning of the end. The next morning, I got up early, showered, and dressed in my best suit. I made myself a strong cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, going over my notes and preparing for the meeting with the lawyer. Ella walked in, looking tired and slightly hungover. "Good morning," she muttered, barely looking at me. "Morning," I replied, my tone neutral. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from me. "What's with the suit? Got a big meeting or something?" "Something like that," I said, not elaborating. She shrugged and didn't press further. I finished my coffee, grabbed my briefcase, and headed out the door. The drive to the lawyer's office was filled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. But as I walked into the office and met with the attorney, I felt a surge of empowerment. I laid out my situation, and he assured me that I had a strong case. After the meeting, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. This was no longer just about escaping Ella's toxic influence. It was about reclaiming my life and my dignity. I spent the afternoon making more plans, ensuring that I had everything in place for the inevitable confrontation. When I returned home that evening, Ella was out again. I sat down at my desk and began drafting a letter to my daughters, explaining the situation and reassuring them that I would always be there for them. It was a difficult letter to write, but it was necessary. The days that followed were a blur of preparations. I continued to gather evidence, document everything, and strengthen my case. I also started reaching out to friends and family, rebuilding connections that I had neglected over the years. The support I received was overwhelming, and it gave me the strength to push forward. Finally, the day came when I had everything in place. I served Ella the divorce papers. She was furious, screaming and throwing things, but I remained calm. I had anticipated this reaction and was ready for it. As she stormed out of the house, threatening to take everything from me, I stood firm. This was my turning point. I had spent too many years living in fear and submission. Now it was time to stand up for myself and create a future where I could find true happiness and peace. The journey ahead would be tough, but I was ready to face it head on. For my daughters, for my new family, and most importantly, for myself. The days of being controlled and belittled were over. I was reclaiming my life, one step at a time. Furious, and I began to lose my concentration. I needed to find a way to destroy the last vestiges of my attachment to her. And I think I found a way. I found the box I was looking for, and the particular picture in it. It was the only picture of my mom and sisters. I didn't think it would work, but I cut Ella's face out of the picture and pasted it next to them. I had no love left for them, and adding Ella's smirking face to the picture might help. I put it on the desk next to the monitor in my office. At about 12:45, I was finishing up work. I had pretty much decided what I was going to do in the near future. I had an idea of when I would be leaving, but it could be in a few weeks. I had time because Ella didn't expect me to leave. It might not work out, and I would definitely need help to pull it all off. But by now, I had convinced myself that I would go all the way. I heard someone stumble out the door, and as I got up to look out the window, I saw Henry Walker's car pull away. I heard her coming up the stairs and quickly erased my story. I would have to use incognito mode in the future. I waited for her to enter our bedroom before heading downstairs to make myself some coffee. I sat down on the couch and thought about my future away from this place. The more I envisioned my life without Ella, the clearer my plans became. I would start by securing a new place to live, somewhere peaceful and far away from the constant reminders of betrayal. I'd need to find a new job, one that allowed me to use my skills without the toxic environment I was currently in. I could start fresh, maybe even move closer to my newfound family in Cambridge. As I sipped my coffee, the possibilities began to excite me. I could reconnect with Rachel and her family, build new relationships, and finally find the happiness that had eluded me for so long. The thought of leaving my current life behind felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies, people who understood my situation and could offer support. I decided to reach out to my old friend Toby. He had always been there for me, and I was sure he would help me navigate this difficult transition. I also thought about my daughters. They were old enough to understand what was happening, and I owed it to them to be honest. They needed to know that their father's happiness was just as important as their mother's whims. I would sit them down and explain everything, ensuring they knew I loved them and that my decision was for the best. Determined to take action, I spent the rest of the afternoon making calls and setting up meetings. I contacted a real estate agent to start looking for a new home and scheduled an appointment with a career counselor to explore job opportunities. The more steps I took, the more empowered I felt. By the time Ella came back downstairs, I had a clear plan in place. She barely acknowledged me as she grabbed a drink from the fridge and headed back upstairs. I didn't care. I was focused on my future, a future without her toxic influence. That evening, I made a list of everything I needed to do. I organized my thoughts and prioritized tasks, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. I felt a sense of control and purpose that had been missing for years. As I lay in bed that night, I allowed myself to dream about the life I would create. It would be a life filled with genuine connections, personal growth, and true happiness. I was ready to leave the past behind and embrace the future. It was time to reclaim my life and live it on my own terms. And honestly, without my daughter's presence, I knew it wouldn't be so bad. I decided to try and move closer to them. Monday morning, I came to work, clearly realizing that I wouldn't lift another finger. Jack Walker could fire me for all I cared. I walked to my office, ignoring the taunts and comments directed at me. I would destroy those bastards, and I knew my anger would get me through this. I managed to get an appointment with the bank for 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I took the time to prepare for it by analyzing my finances. The odds were slim, but if everything worked out and the right people helped me, I would come out of this situation unscathed. The meeting went as planned, and I was able to close my savings account and remove my name from our joint account. I still had an ISA with a few thousand in it, so I closed it for cash and put it in my wallet. On the way to the office, I stopped by the PC World store and bought 2 digital voice recorders, a 500 gig USB 3.0 hard drive, and a new hard drive for my PC. Back in the office, I sat down at my desk and began to see if I could open the company's personal client files. I had seen a glimpse of them in Jack's office, so I knew they existed, but I needed his password. It didn't take me more than an hour to crack it. Ironically, his wife's name was his username, and the password was his name and 6-digit birthday number, Jack24656. I had everything I needed. I plugged the disk into my computer and loaded all the files onto it. 10 minutes later, I did the same with all my new plans and drawings for the energy-efficient hydraulic pump system I was working on to keep this company ahead of the curve. We were creating pumps for air conditioners, heavy equipment, and even the dairy sector. I erased all of my computer history, including all of my plans and designs. Then I shut it down, removed the hard drive, and replaced it with a new one. I put everything in my bag and reinstalled Windows. I spent the rest of the day researching our competitors on my phone. I logged onto the Monster website to look for engineering jobs in the South London, Surrey area, and then left for the day. That evening, after another silent dinner, I went to my office. I discovered that one of our major competitors, going through a financial downturn, was looking for a mechanical engineer to help design and run the shop. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, but it was pretty darn close. They were offering a salary 10 compound less than my current salary, so I sent an email and attached my CV. That night, I decided to sleep in our marital bed, just so I wouldn't disturb Ella. However, I made sure I was already asleep when she walked in. I felt her rubbing against me, and I felt sick to my stomach. But as sick as it was, it felt good to react that way. She became disgusted with me, and that would help me in the long run. The next day, I received a call from a very surprised Robert Williams of Sutton Hydraulics. We spoke briefly, and he couldn't believe that I would consider leaving Walker Engineering. I explained to him in vague terms that the work environment had become unbearable and that I was looking for a fresh start. Robert was sympathetic and asked if I could come in for an interview the following week. I agreed and felt a surge of hope. In the meantime, I continued to gather evidence and documentation. I recorded conversations, took notes on Ella's movements, and kept meticulous records of my interactions at work. I wanted to be prepared for any legal battles that might arise. My lawyer assured me that I was taking the right steps and that we had a strong case for divorce and asset protection. As the week went on, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. I was taking control of my life, making decisions that were best for me and my daughters. The toxic environment at home and work no longer felt insurmountable. Instead, they were obstacles that I was determined to overcome. By the time the weekend rolled around, I had a solid plan in place. I would meet with Robert Williams, secure a new job, and finalize my divorce. I also planned to sit down with my daughters and explain everything to them. They deserved to know the truth and to see their father standing up for himself. On Saturday, I met with Toby and shared my plans. He was incredibly supportive and offered to help in any way he could. We spent hours discussing strategies and potential pitfalls, and by the end of the day, I felt more confident than ever. Sunday was spent preparing for my interview and organizing the last of my documents. I wanted to make sure that I left nothing to chance. This was my opportunity to start anew, and I was determined to seize it. The following week, I walked into Sutton Hydraulics with my head held high. The interview went well, and Robert seemed genuinely impressed with my experience and ideas. By the end of the meeting, he offered me the job, and I accepted it on the spot. Returning home that evening, I felt a sense of relief. I had a new job, a supportive network of friends and family, and a clear path forward. As I sat down to dinner with Ella, I couldn't help but smile. She noticed and gave me a puzzled look. "What's with the smile?" she asked, suspicious. "Just thinking about the future," I replied, feeling a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. In the days that followed, I began the process of moving out and starting my new life. Ella was furious, but I remained calm and resolute. This was my time, and I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. I was finally free to live the life I deserved, and I was ready to embrace every moment of it. Engineering for his small company. He offered me the job almost immediately, but I insisted on an interview the next day. He accepted. Another important screw was put in place, and the wheel started turning very quickly. I had a lot of free time, so I started looking for apartments in the area. I didn't need a house, and although there weren't many options, I managed to find one very nice apartment to rent. It was £1,200 a month with 2 bedrooms and was perfect for me. The apartment was 15 minutes from the girls and 5 minutes from work. I arranged a viewing the day after my interview with Robert Williams was over. I then spoke to Jack and told him that I needed to meet my daughters in Kingston the next day to sign some papers, but he just brushed me off and said, "Go." That night, I called my best friend Toby Brown. We'd known each other since 6th grade. We had both gone to Kingston, but he had studied finance and math. He was now a big banking analyst in the city and lived with his wife and kids in a nice house in Twickenham. Most of all, he and his wife hated Ella, so we rarely spoke to each other as a couple. Ella was jealous of Sarah because she was an ambitious web developer and married to a rich banker. I guess, even with all I was giving her, I still fell short of her expectations. I arranged to meet Toby the next night after the interview and apartment viewing. He knew I had something on my mind, but I told him I'd tell him all about it when we met. Along the way, I thought about many things. Today was important, not only for my immediate plans, but also for my long-term future. At this point, I had no idea how the girls would react. Until the recent revelations, I had planned to retire at 55. I was thinking of investing in a villa in Italy or somewhere else. My mortgage would be paid off when I turned 50, and the extra 5 years of work would allow us to accumulate a nice little fund without relying solely on a retirement wallet. The interview with Robert Williams went smoothly, and the apartment was perfect. I had plenty of time before meeting Toby, so I grabbed lunch for me and the girls and headed to their apartment. They lived together, and I was paying half the rent. As I approached the house, I didn't know what I would say to them. I didn't know how often they talked to their mom, but I knew I didn't want to hide anything from them. When they saw me, they ran up and grabbed me as I was already walking through the door. My smile could have been seen from space. I missed them both so much. "Daddy, Daddy!" they shouted, laughing as if they were still toddlers. They led me into the house, and I laid out the lunch I had grabbed on the way. We sat and ate while they told me about their lives and schoolwork. I was so proud of my two girls. Sophie had already studied pharmacology for 2 years, and Ava was studying nursing. Two professions for loving and caring people. I saw Rachel in them and talked at length about our new family, promising that we would all meet soon. When we finished lunch, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to have the difficult conversation. Girls, there's something important I need to talk to you about, I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. They looked at me with concern, sensing the seriousness of my tone. I've decided to leave your mother. I can't continue in this toxic environment, and I believe it's best for all of us if I start anew. They were silent for a moment, processing what I had just said. Sophie was the first to speak. Dad, we've seen how unhappy you've been. We support you, and we want you to be happy too. Ava nodded in agreement. We love you, Dad, and we just want what's best for you. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Their support meant everything to me. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about the future and making plans to stay close. I promised to visit often and to always be there for them. Later that evening, I met Toby at our favorite pub. He listened intently as I laid out everything that had happened. You did the right thing, Jake, he said firmly. You deserve to be happy, and I'm here to support you every step of the way. We spent hours talking, reminiscing about old times, and making plans for the future. It felt good to have a friend who truly understood and supported me. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I finalized the lease on the new apartment, handed in my resignation at Walker Engineering, and began the process of moving out. Ella was furious, but I remained calm and focused. I had a clear plan and a bright future ahead of me. By the end of the week, I was settled into my new apartment. It felt strange at first, but also liberating. I had taken control of my life and was on the path to happiness. I reconnected with my daughters, spent time with my new family in Cambridge, and focused on my new job at Sutton Hydraulics. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities, but I faced them with confidence and determination. The past was behind me, and I was ready to embrace the future. This was my time to rebuild and thrive, and I was determined to make the most of it. I took a sip of coffee and wondered. They knew something was going on. What is it, Daddy? Spill it, Sophie said. Well, you know your mom cheated on me, right? I said. They both looked at each other, then returned their gaze to me and nodded in unison. Well, I've had enough, and I've decided I'm going to leave her, I muttered to everyone's smiles. Ava said. About time, Daddy, Sophie added. You're not mad or anything, girls? I asked timidly. No, Daddy. For as long as I can remember, she's been a bitch to you, Sophie growled. I thought about reprimanding her for disrespecting her mother, but I didn't. In fact, I thought, good for Sophie. I also felt ashamed again because they had obviously seen this growing up. I hoped they wouldn't follow in their mother's footsteps as far as men were concerned. I hoped I hadn't hurt them in any way because I was too weak and pathetic. I also hoped that I respected them. What are you going to do, Daddy? Asked Ava. I told them that I had a new job and that I would be moving closer to them. They were thrilled, but also surprised that I'd actually decided to move away from their cheating mother and had already made plans to do so. For that, I received 2 strong and loving hugs. I told them I would do everything I could to protect my financial future without going into too much detail. When I got up to leave, they said they would support me no matter what. And although they loved their mother, she came second to me, and she always had. I left their apartment full of happiness and was now ready for the next phase of my plan. This was the most important part. Toby and Sarah met a few years after he left university. They are 2 of the nicest people I know, and tonight I would be counting on their favor. I was greeted warmly as usual, but my mind was spinning about what I would be asking of them, and they both knew I was out of my depth. They wanted to know at once what was going on, and I told them. There was no point in beating around the bush. I told them everything that had happened and the first part of my plans. They were more surprised by my resistance than by Ella's infidelity. It was quite commonplace in their eyes. So why did you dump her now, Jake? Asked Sarah, handing me another cup of tea. I declined something stronger since I had to drive home today. I always thought she was cheating on me, but I couldn't prove it. Now she admitted it, and everything fell into place. I also discovered something that made me say I'd had enough. I told them about meeting my cousins and that my mom kicked my dad out of the house and that my sister sided with her. My father was just like me, or rather, I was just like him. But this time, my girls are on my side. So, it was this discovery that prompted you to finally stand up for yourself? Asked Toby. Worry was written all over his face. No. I was taken to my father's grave. I was hesitant at first, but I managed to lay flowers and say a few words. Then I looked at the engraving on the stone, which shocked me. That's when I realized I had to leave, I explained. What did it say? Sarah asked, her curiosity piqued. It said, James Price, a man who never gave up on love. It struck a chord with me. I realized that staying in a loveless marriage was giving up on myself. My father had been forced out of his home, but he never gave up on the idea of love. I couldn't let Ella continue to dictate my life. I needed to find my own path, one where I could truly be happy and free. Toby leaned back in his chair, nodding thoughtfully. I'm proud of you, Jake. It takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing. Sarah reached out and squeezed my hand. We're here for you, whatever you need. Their support bolstered my resolve. I spent the next few hours discussing my plans in detail, making sure every step was carefully thought out. Toby offered to help with the financial aspects, ensuring that I was protected in the divorce. Sarah promised to be there for emotional support, reminding me that I had a network of friends and family who cared about me. As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of empowerment and clarity. The pieces of my new life were falling into place. I had a new job, a new apartment, and the unwavering support of my daughters and friends. The future no longer seemed daunting. It was a landscape of possibilities waiting to be explored. When I got home, Ella was waiting for me, her expression a mix of annoyance and curiosity. Where have you been? She demanded. Out, I replied simply, planning my future. She scoffed, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. For the first time, she sensed that I was serious about leaving her. I didn't engage further. I went upstairs, packed a few more things, and prepared for the final steps of my departure. The next morning, I left the house with a sense of finality. I was ready to start my new life, leaving behind the toxic remnants of my old one. As I settled into my new apartment, I felt a wave of relief. The space was small but cozy, and it represented a fresh start. My daughters visited often, filling the apartment with laughter and warmth. My job at Sutton Hydraulics was challenging and rewarding, and I found myself thriving in the new environment. Over time, the scars of my past began to heal. I reconnected with my extended family in Cambridge, forging strong bonds that brought me immense joy. My relationship with my daughters grew stronger, and I watched with pride as they pursued their dreams. Looking back, I realized that the decision to leave Ella had been the best one I ever made. It had set me on a path to true happiness, surrounded by people who loved and supported me. Life was finally as it should be, filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. What was that, Jake? They said in unison. It had a rose on it, and below it was the inscription, in memory of him. There was the date of his birth, and below that, the age at which he died. There was silence for a moment before I spoke again. He died at the age of 44, the age I am now. Toby and Sarah recoiled slightly at this news, and I realized they understood. There were times when I could reach for a shot glass like he did, or drive myself to suicide, as my grandmother thought he was doing. I had a choice, be like him or fight back, I said clearly. I decided that I wasn't to kill myself anymore by trying to be the perfect husband while being bullied and ridiculed. At that moment, I felt weaker than I had in weeks. Admitting to my friends how down I was harder than I'd realized. Toby had knocked me off my game. What do you want from us, Jake? Toby asked. Please refuse if it's too much, but I have a plan to protect myself and— Get that bitch down, Sarah intervened. I smiled and nodded. Sarah did seem to have a tough side to her character. When I thought she was having an affair in 2008, I opened a separate savings account and put all my bonuses and all my spare cash into it. I was also lucky that the only way I could get a mortgage loan for the amount we needed was to apply in my name only. Ella had no real employment history, so it was easier for me to apply a loan. I knew that if anyone was capable of following my train of thought, It was Toby. My savings with interest are now worth £60,800. I have £120,000 left on my mortgage, but the house in the next street over from me has sold for over $500,000. Toby, I need you and your connections to get me a short-term loan for the remaining £60,000. I want to pay off the mortgage before I divorce her. Why bother? Sarah asked. It means she can have half. Well, unless you count the £60,000 pounds in savings I'm keeping, she can fight for half of everything anyway. But that's where you come in, I said, pausing for a second. I want you to incorporate a new company. What do you mean register a new company? Toby interjected. I want to transfer ownership of my house to your new company. That means she won't be able to lay her hands on it. I've looked into it, and if I pay off the mortgage, all I have to do is go to the land registry and transfer the paperwork to your company. Toby and Sarah looked at each other for a moment. Will that work, Jake? I mean, if you divorce her, she'll hire a lawyer and fight for everything. She doesn't have the money for it, and I'm sure her parents won't want to pay such a huge bill if they know their daughter is a cheating whore. Plus, I'm hoping to use her opinion of me to my advantage, I said. How? Asked Toby. She thinks I'm a coward who will never leave her. So I won't ask for a divorce until I sell the house. The property becomes cash, and by the time she realizes I'm divorcing her, we can move that money into a lot of different accounts. Toby just smiled at me and said, I never knew you had it in you, Jake. Sarah added, it sounds risky, but if anyone can pull it off, it's you. You've been putting up with her for so long, you deserve to come out on top. I felt a rush of gratitude towards my friends. They were willing to support me in ways I hadn't expected, and their belief in my plan gave me the confidence I needed. We spent the next few hours hashing out the details. Toby would set up the new company, and I'd work on paying off the mortgage as quickly as possible. We discussed the legalities, the potential pitfalls, and the best ways to move the money discreetly. It was a complex plan, but with their help, I felt it was achievable. As I drove home that night, my mind was buzzing with the possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my destiny. I had a clear path forward, and with the support of my friends and daughters, I was ready to take the necessary steps to reclaim my life. When I got home, Ella was waiting for me, her expression curious and somewhat annoyed. Where have you been? She demanded. Out, I replied simply, planning our future. She scoffed, but didn't press further, sensing something different about my demeanor. I didn't engage in further conversation and went straight to my office, where I began working on the next steps of my plan. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I managed to pay off the mortgage, transfer the house to the new company, and continue gathering evidence against Ella. The day finally came when I served her the divorce papers. She was livid, but I remained calm and focused. My new job at Sutton Hydraulics was going well, and I felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that had been missing for years. My daughters were supportive, and my relationship with them grew stronger every day. The new family connections in Cambridge brought a sense of belonging and joy I hadn't felt in a long time. Looking back, I realized that the decision to leave Ella and reclaim my life had been the best one I ever made. It had set me on a path to true happiness, surrounded by people who loved and supported me. Life was finally as it should be, filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. I didn't think you had it in you, Jake, Toby said, his tone both surprised and approving. So you're going to help me? I asked, my heart pounding with anticipation. Oh, yes, he replied confidently. I'll get right on it, but you know a good lawyer will try to trace the money, don't you? Yes, but it will take a long time, and she won't be able to afford a big legal bill, I responded, feeling a flicker of hope. After another hour of strategizing, I headed home. All the pieces were coming together. On the drive back, a new resolve settled within me. I decided that I wasn't even going to file for divorce. I was sure I wouldn't meet anyone else, let alone remarry, and staying married would buy me more time. I chuckled to myself, thinking about how Ella wouldn't even notice my absence for at least a month. By next week, I planned to be long gone. When I arrived home, it was nearly 2 a.m. I peeked in on Ella, who was sound asleep, oblivious to the storm brewing in our lives. No remorse is keeping her awake, I thought bitterly. I retreated to the spare room, determined to keep my distance. Thursday morning, I was up and out of the house before Ella even stirred. I wrote my resignation letter in the morning and called Toby around lunchtime. "I've got good news, bad news, and then good news again, buddy," Toby began, his voice cheerful. "Okay, let's go in that order," I said, managing a laugh despite the turmoil inside me. "The good news is that I have registered the company. It only takes an hour at the company house," he said. "The bad news is that to get a loan for the amount you need, you'll need some serious collateral. Something like a house, and that won't work for you," he continued. I felt a wave of frustration, but before I could speak, Toby went on. "Listen, Jake, you trust me, and I trust you. I've been talking to Sarah about this, and we've been thinking the same thing. I'll transfer £60,000 into your account right now so you can get on the case. Just give me the money back when you find it, okay?" I was stunned. If he could see my face now, he'd know just how grateful I was. "This is too much, Toby. You've done enough already," I started to say, but he interrupted me. "Just take the money and go do what you need to do," he insisted. "You have no idea how much this helps me, buddy. I owe you a huge debt of gratitude," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Just do it. Walk away from this disrespectful money-grabbing scammer and be happy. That's all we care about," he said. I gave him my details and ended the call. My next call was to the bank, arranging a meeting for the next day. After a day of busy work or lack thereof, I drove to the local Land Rover dealership. I knew the owner because that's where I had bought Ella's Range Rover Sport about 10 months ago. In fact, I was still paying for it. An idea formed in my mind on how to get some more money. "Hello, Mr. Price. Have you finally decided on a new car?" John Reeves greeted me at the entrance, his smile welcoming. "No, John. I wanted to discuss selling my wife's car and paying off my debt," I said, trying to keep my tone light despite the weight of my decision. "I hope everything's okay?" he asked, his eyes narrowing with concern. "It's okay. You've met her, and you know how demanding she is. Now she wants a Mercedes 404, I explained, managing a rueful smile. "I don't want to say anything bad, but she did seem quite particular," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. We came to an agreement that he would take the Range Rover back, and we would cancel our payment arrangement. This deal would not only clear my debt, but also provide me with some extra cash. As I drove home, I felt a sense of liberation. It was time to take control of my life and leave the past behind. I promised John I'd return to upgrade my car, and he seemed eager to offset the value of Holly's practically new car by reselling it. I apologized for any inconvenience, but the prospect of selling me an even more expensive new Range Rover more than made up for it. On my way out, I picked up a 2016 brochure, but it wasn't for me. It was for Holly. When I got home, Holly was sitting in the living room, sipping coffee and looking a little pale. I took off my jacket and threw my bag on the floor. "Everything okay, love?" I asked through clenched teeth. "Yeah, just a little tired, honey," she replied, taking a sip from her mug. She held out her arms, wanting a hug, hoping I would comfort her and make her feel better. I ignored her, went back to my bag, and pulled out the brochure. "I know what will make you feel better," I said, walking over to her and sitting down on the coffee table across from her. She looked confused at the empty seat next to her and then back at me. "What do you have there?" she asked, eyeing the brochure. "Your car is almost a year old, and I was at the dealership today. I saw their new model. It's amazing," I said as her eyes lit up. "I want my wife to have the best, so I'm going to trade in your car and buy you this one," I continued, pointing to the 2017 model in the brochure. "Oh, I love that," she said, her voice full of excitement. "You always know how to make me feel better, don't you, Jake? The only problem is they already have a buyer for your car, so I need to get it there by Friday afternoon. I'll finish work early and drive it to the dealership. You can use mine this weekend to visit your loved ones." The last remark made her recoil, a look of shock and confusion crossing her face. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Nothing, Jake. I just thought you were still mad about our arrangement," she replied, her voice tentative. "It wasn't our arrangement, Holly. It was yours. I didn't have a say in it, but I guess I don't really have a choice, do I?" I said, hoping for a response. She only nodded, seemingly satisfied, as if she had finally put me in my place. "I love you, Jake," she said, looking at me with a sincere expression of concern. I didn't respond, just turned and walked away to the kitchen. The phone rang, and I stepped into the garden to answer it. It was Toby, confirming that the money had been transferred. I was ready to go. The next day, wasting no time, I walked into the bank and soon found myself in the office of a mortgage loan officer. She appeared to be about my age, but she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. For a moment, I wondered if there might be life after Holly, but I pushed the thought aside. An hour later, the mortgage was paid off, and all my remaining accounts were closed. I went through several houses and opened a new account at another bank. I was relieved knowing I wouldn't have to pay anything else unless Holly hired a lawyer and went to court. My smile faded as I returned to the office, ignoring Olivia as she rose to speak to me. I sat down with a cup of coffee and contemplated the next stage of my plan. I contacted the land registry and filled out the appropriate online application form. I had all the details of Toby and Sarah's new company, and within 10 minutes of submitting the form, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. I was happy to move forward, yet wary of the challenges that lay ahead. After submitting the application, I received a confirmation email stating it would take 3 to 5 days to process. Once processed, I would hand the paperwork over to Toby, allowing him to register the property under his company's name. While waiting, I spent some time browsing the internet for furniture and details on canceling utilities for the house. I knew I had to wait for the right moment, but I also opened new accounts for my upcoming apartment in Sutton. Finally, there was one last thing I had to do, something I had been putting off. I knocked on Jack's door, and unsurprisingly, Olivia was there with him. That dirty old bastard usually fiddled with her on Fridays, and I seemed to be interrupting their rendezvous. She left us alone. "What can I do to help, Jake?" he said cheerfully, escorting Olivia out with a glance. I placed my resignation letter on his desk. He looked at me with a silly grin. "What is it?" he asked. "I have resigned," I replied. "I think it would be best if I left immediately. Given the situation with our families, I doubt you'll want me here for too long." He looked dumbfounded. "I'd appreciate it if you could have my P45 ready by Monday, and please don't tell anyone about it. My wife doesn't know," I said defiantly. "Jake, you can't do that. We need you," he said pathetically. "Not as much as you need your nephew. I'll be here on Monday to pick up the last of my things." I pretended to drop a pen from my pocket and, bending over, pulled a digital voice recorder out of my sock. I managed to attach a pin to it and, standing up, pressed the record button and slid it under the seat into the wooden frame. "If that's all, Jack, I've got things to do." "Okay, Jake, but don't come crawling back when you're out of money. Your money is the only thing keeping your cheating wife with you. Do you realize that?" "Of course I know that, Jack," I smiled. "I wish my wife was as faithful as yours," I said, hitting him where it hurt. I turned and walked out of his office. An hour later, I drove home, picked up Ella's car, and drove to the dealership. John Reeves offered to drive me home, and I gladly accepted. When I got back that evening, Ella was sitting at the kitchen table with red bags under her eyes. It was clear she'd been crying. "What's going on, Hulse?" I asked with feigned sincerity. "We need to talk, Jake," she said, gesturing for me to sit down. For a moment, I felt a wave of terror wash over me. "What's going on?" I asked. "I was at the doctor's office today, and I was diagnosed." She hesitated, looking scared. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my mind. If this was serious, what kind of man would I be to leave a seriously ill woman as I was planning to? "Just tell me, Ella, what is it?" I urged her to spit it out. "I have gonorrhea," she finally said, bursting into tears. I laughed. Hell, I laughed hard, and she just stared at me. "It's not funny, Jake. I'm so embarrassed," she said. I turned to her, and she looked confused. This was supposed to be humiliating for her. "Well, I know I don't have it because I haven't touched you in over a month, and when I found out about your adventures, I used protection," I said, trying not to gloat too much. "Oh, so everything's fine with you? Is it all good?" She was silent. "Just take your medication, and soon you'll be back on your feet." "Oops, I mean on your back again," I said with a smirk. So I crashed at their place. "Didn't want to risk driving home drunk," I explained casually. Ella looked at me with a mixture of relief and suspicion. "Oh, okay, I was worried about you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm a grown man. I can take care of myself," I replied, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. She sighed and nodded, returning to her chores. I watched her for a moment, feeling a strange mix of pity and anger. She had brought this on herself, but there was still a part of me that hated seeing her so broken. "If looks could kill, I'd be dead by now," I muttered under my breath. "Just find out which one of them gave it to you and tell them to see a doctor before they spread the disease further," I said, getting up and leaving her crying at the table. That night, I got my first good night's sleep in months. Of course, I slept in the spare room. I wasn't taking any chances with an exhausted wife. Saturday morning, I felt great. A good night's sleep definitely helped, so I went to our bedroom and woke Ella. "I'm going to visit the girls. I'll give them your best wishes. Get some rest, okay?" I said, with as much love as I could muster. She smiled weakly and asked me to hug her. I obliged, but half-heartedly. As she released her grip, she looked at me sadly. "You think I'm disgusting, don't you?" I said nothing, just watched as tears ran down her cheeks. "I just want you to feel better, that's all," I said finally. "Oh, Jake, I love you so much. I think I screwed up big time. I told Allison about my problem, and she was horrified. At first, I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it quickly evaporated. I realized that I had lost all love for the woman I had been married to for 21 years. Without saying another word, I left the room, got into the car, and drove away happily. Later that morning, I sat with the girls and told them everything that had happened. They were amazed, and I could see a new respect in their eyes. I even told them about Ella's little trip to the doctors, which they found hilarious. I shouldn't have laughed, but I couldn't help it. It suggested that maybe the girls really did hate her as much as I did. "What's she gonna do, Daddy?" asked Ava. "She'll have to move in with her grandparents or convince one of her lovers to take her in." I have a feeling those degenerates were only interested in having sex with a married woman and bragging about it. I doubt they would want to have a relationship with her. "What do you think?" I asked. They both just looked at me and shook their heads. That evening, I stayed with Toby and Sarah, who were hosting a dinner party attended by many friends and coworkers. Among the invitees were several single women my age, and I felt confident enough to strike up a conversation with them. The alcohol helped me approach a woman named Amy, who caught my eye. She was a divorced friend of Sarah's, and as the drinks flowed, she even managed to talk me into dancing. It was a fun night, and just what I needed. A night where I wasn't thinking about Ella, the end of my marriage, or my plans to leave her, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. When I got home late Sunday morning, I found Ella doing chores around the house. I walked into the living room, and when she saw me, she rushed over and hugged me. I just patted her on the back. "Where were you staying last night, Jake?" "I thought you were coming home," she asked. Toby and Sarah had a dinner party, and I had too much to drink, so I crashed at their place. "Didn't want to risk driving home drunk," I explained casually. Ella looked at me with a mixture of relief and suspicion. "Oh, okay. I was worried about you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm a grown man. I can take care of myself," I replied, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. She sighed and nodded, returning to her chores. I watched her for a moment, feeling a strange mix of pity and anger. She had brought this on herself, but there was still a part of me that hated seeing her so broken. "If looks could kill, I'd be dead by now," I muttered under my breath. "Just find out which one of them gave it to you and tell them to see a doctor before they spread the disease further," I said, getting up and leaving her crying at the table. That night, I got my first good night's sleep in months. Of course, I slept in the spare room. I wasn't taking any chances with an exhausted wife. "On a cold night like this," she said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. I hesitated, torn between my plan and the remnants of the affection I once had for her. "All right, Ella," I said, giving in for the moment, "just for tonight." As we lay in bed, she curled up next to me, her warmth a stark contrast to the coldness I felt inside. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming week and the final steps of my plan. Ella's soft breathing eventually lulled me into a restless sleep. Monday morning came quickly. I woke up early, careful not to disturb Ella. As I prepared for the day, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and dread. Today would be the beginning of the end. After dropping Ella off in town to meet her sister, I drove to the dealership. John Reeves greeted me warmly and handed over the keys to Ella's new Range Rover. "Thanks for the help, John," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "This means a lot." "No problem, Jake. Just remember, if you ever need another car, you know where to find me," he replied with a wink. Driving back, I couldn't help but think about how things had spiraled to this point. The love we once shared was now buried under lies and betrayal. But today, I was taking the first step towards a fresh start. When I picked Ella up later, her excitement over the new car was palpable. "It's beautiful, Jake. Thank you so much," she exclaimed, hugging me tightly. "You're welcome," I said, forcing a smile. "Enjoy it." For the next few days, I kept up appearances, pretending everything was fine. Ella seemed to be in a better mood, probably thinking that our problems were behind us. Little did she know, the final act was about to begin. Wednesday afternoon, I left work early and went home to pack my things. I took only what I needed, leaving behind the memories that no longer held any value. I placed the resignation letter on Jack's desk, knowing it would be a shock to him and everyone else. But it was necessary. By the time Ella returned home, I was already gone. I had left a note on the kitchen table, explaining that I needed time to think and that I wouldn't be coming back. I knew it was cowardly to leave without a proper goodbye, but I couldn't face her tears and pleas. I drove to the airport, my heart heavy but resolute. Boarding the plane, I looked out the window, watching the city that had been my home for so long fade into the distance. This was it, my chance to start over, to build a new life free from the shadows of the past. As the plane soared into the sky, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of the last few months lifted off my shoulders, replaced by a cautious optimism. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I was ready to find out. And was getting ready in the bathroom when I knocked on the door. "Are you almost done?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Just a minute," she replied, her voice slightly muffled by the sound of running water. I could hear the frustration in her tone, but I didn't care anymore. I had a plan, and I was sticking to it. I walked downstairs and poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the kitchen. As I sipped, I thought about everything that had led up to this moment. Ella's betrayal, her manipulation, and the way she had turned our marriage into a mockery. Today was the day I would finally be free. Ella came down, looking somewhat put together, but still with a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. "Ready to go?" I asked. She nodded, grabbing her purse. "Yes, let's go. I don't want to be late." The drive to the hairdresser's was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we arrived, she leaned over and gave me a peck on the cheek. "See you later, Jake," she said, trying to muster a smile. "Yeah, see you," I replied, watching as she walked away. As soon as she was out of sight, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. This was it. I drove away, heading straight for the bank to finalize everything. By the time Ella returned home, I was already packing up the last of my things. The house felt empty, devoid of the memories that had once filled it. I left her a note on the kitchen table, simple and to the point. "Ella, I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore. I've closed our joint accounts and filed for divorce. You'll receive the papers soon. This is goodbye. Jake." I took one last look around, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Then, I walked out the door, closing it softly behind me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was finally free from Ella's grasp. As I drove away, I thought about the possibilities that lay ahead. New places, new people, and a new life free from the toxicity that had poisoned my marriage. The road stretched out before me, and for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was time to start living for myself again. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and meetings. My attorney assured me that everything was in order and that the divorce would be finalized soon. I found a small apartment in the city, modest but comfortable, and began to settle in. It was strange being on my own, but it also felt right. I started going out more, exploring the city and meeting new people. I reconnected with old friends and even made some new ones. Life was beginning to feel normal again, and I was grateful for the fresh start. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment, a text message lit up my phone. It was from Amy, the woman I had met at Toby and Sarah's party. "Hey Jake, want to grab a drink sometime?" she wrote. I smiled and typed back, "I'd love to. How about this Friday?" "Perfect," she replied. As I put my phone down, I realized how far I had come in such a short time. The scars of my past were still there, but they were healing. I was moving forward, one step at a time, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely happy. At 8:30, so I drove her into town as planned. "Don't forget to take a cab to the dealership around 2 in the afternoon. They're waiting for you," I reminded her, ignoring her attempts to kiss me. I drove off, knowing that this might be the last time I would see her. A part of me was afraid it wouldn't be, but I was determined to make it happen. As I drove away, I called the cell phone company and canceled both of our contracts. I pulled over to the side of the road to pay the termination fee with my card. They informed me that the phones would be working until 5 p.m. Perfect. I then headed to the office to pick up my P45. When I entered the factory, there was a solemn atmosphere. The news of my departure must have spread, and for a brief moment, I saw a look of apprehension on everyone's faces. Walking down the hallway toward my office, I passed the coffee machine where the usual suspects had gathered. I wasn't sure if Max and Henry knew they were both sleeping with my wife, but they smirked at me and exchanged jokes with the other jerks. "Good morning, guys," I said cheerfully. "Good morning, Jake. How's the wife?" they jeered, followed by the usual laughter. "Not so great, I'm afraid," I replied. "One of you bastards swiped her." I walked away, leaving them in stunned silence. When I glanced back, their jaws had dropped, and Max yelled something to Henry. I heard a commotion behind me as I headed up the stairs. Olivia saw me coming and gave me a half smile, lowering her head. Perhaps now I was finally earning some respect. Jack was at the door of his office, looking grim. He ushered me in, and I handed him my resignation letter. He stared at it, then at me. "Is this really necessary, Jake?" he asked, his tone more pleading than authoritative. "Yes, Jack, it is. Given the circumstances, it's best for everyone," I replied firmly. He sighed and nodded. "I'll have your P45 ready by the end of the day. Please, let's keep this between us for now." "Of course," I said and turned to leave. As I walked back to my office, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This place had been my second home for years, but it was time to move on. I spent the next few hours packing up my belongings and saying quiet goodbyes to those I trusted. By the time I returned home, it was mid-afternoon. Ella was nowhere to be seen, and the house felt eerily quiet. I packed the last of my things, making sure I had everything I needed. I left a note on the kitchen table. "Ella, I've canceled our phone contracts and informed the bank. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. Jake." I took one last look around the house, memories flooding back, both good and bad. With a deep breath, I walked out the door, closing it softly behind me. The sun was setting as I drove to my new apartment, a sense of liberation washing over me. That evening, I met with Toby and Sarah to hand over the paperwork for the house. They were thrilled and supportive, making the process smooth and quick. We had a few drinks to celebrate, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine sense of happiness. The next few days were a whirlwind of adjustments and new beginnings. I settled into my new apartment, decorated it to my liking, and started making plans for the future. Amy and I went out for that drink, and it turned into dinner and a long walk through the city. She was kind, funny, and understanding, everything I needed at that moment. As I lay in bed that night, I realized how much my life had changed in such a short time. The scars of my past were healing, and I was moving forward, one step at a time. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was time to start living for myself again, before I could knock. "I have what you need, so take it and get out," Jack barked. Maybe this respect story was just a figment of my imagination. I entered his office and sat down. I discreetly reached under the chair and retrieved the recorder, slipping it into my pocket. I knew he'd laid out his weekly Friday night escapades to Olivia, and now I had it all recorded. "So, do you have another job lined up, Jake?" He snapped. At first, I didn't pay him much attention, but then I decided to give him a piece of my mind. No, nothing lined up, I said nonchalantly. A wide grin spread across his face, probably figuring I'd be crawling back to him soon. So, do I get my last month's paycheck and my year-end bonus? I asked. He burst into laughter just as Olivia walked in with my P45. What's so funny? She asked. Jake just asked for his bonus and salary to be given to him, Jack replied, barely able to contain his mirth. That's hilarious, Olivia said, joining in his laughter. I thought, why not? And joined in the laughter too. It made them stop and look at me like I was crazy. Why are you laughing, Jake? Olivia asked, her confusion evident. I don't know, Olivia. Why do you let that old bastard have sex with you every week? I said, my laughter growing louder. They froze, her eyes widening in shock, and Jack turning beet red with anger. I'm sure Mom and Dad are proud of their slutty little girl, I added. She threw my papers on the floor and ran out of the room in tears. You bastard, Jack hissed. Get out of my office and out of my company before I get the guys to drag you out by your ears. I laughed even harder, walking out of his office and heading to my own to collect the last of my things. As I gathered my belongings, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, and I was ready to embrace it. By the time I returned home, Ella was already gone, as expected. I walked through the now empty house, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. This place held so many memories, both good and bad, but it was time to move on. I loaded the last of my things into my car and took one final look at the house before driving away. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything, and I felt a sense of hope for the future. I had no idea what lay ahead, but I was ready to face it head-on. With a deep breath, I drove towards my new life, leaving the past behind, packed the last of my things. I was still chuckling to myself when I pulled up in front of my house. I got out of the car, lowered the back seats, and opened the trunk. I walked into the house, taking a moment to soak in the memories before starting to pack. I wandered around, deciding what to take with me. I had several Romero burrito works, so I carefully took them down and wrapped them in plastic I found in the garage. I packed them in the car and continued to collect my belongings. I went upstairs and emptied out my closet, pulling all of my documents out of the safe, including the girls' birth certificates and our marriage license. Next, I found the attic ladder and climbed up to retrieve my old stuff. My diploma and family photos were there, along with some keepsakes I hadn't seen in years. I gathered everything, feeling a pang of nostalgia. I also took all the jewelry I had bought for Ella over the years, must have cost over 10,000 pounds, and then I grabbed all the handbags, shoes, and expensive coats I had bought her. Basically, the whole closet was stocked by me, so I took everything. Being the responsible person I am, I had receipts for almost all the stuff for insurance purposes, which would serve me well when it came time to sell it all. Once I finished packing, I realized I would need a TV, so I took that as well, along with my movie collection and Blu-ray player. By this time, my car was too full, so I decided to leave all of Ella's clothes and a few other things I didn't really need, including some of my old clothes. The new me required a new wardrobe, and I knew the girls wouldn't pass up the chance to help me with that. I found all the best pictures of me and the girls and put them in the car. I wasn't in any rush, since Ella wasn't due back until after 2 in the afternoon. I made myself a cup of tea and took a moment to relax. You have to have a cup of tea. I think it's in the Magna Carta, I mused. I picked up the phone, called the telco, and canceled the satellite TV, phone, and internet. I called British Gas and Southern Water to cancel the utilities. It would take a few days, but I didn't care. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the bed, noticing something that gave me an idea that even scared me a little. It was on the very top of the closet in a dusty old box, Ella's wedding dress. She loved it, probably more than I did. I took it down and then found our wedding album among the box of pictures on the bed. Grabbing the duvet cover, I gathered up all my things and headed out into the garden. Once outside, I walked to the middle of the garden and piled everything into a heap. I added all of Ella's clothes and other things that I knew I wouldn't be able to sell. I made sure to leave only her underwear, as I didn't want to get anything contaminated. I went to my car and locked all the doors, ready to leave. When I checked my watch, I saw it was only 1:45 p.m., so I called Robert Williams and told him that I could drop off my P45 later that evening, along with the night shift, so I could start work again tomorrow morning. He was thrilled, and I told him I was already working on plans to get new customers and improve the hydraulic pumps to make us super competitive in the marketplace. I think he sensed my enthusiasm, and as I wrapped up the conversation, I hoped I had made his day. It was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was sitting there waiting for the call. Finding some paint thinner in the garage, I went out into the garden and poured it on the pile of clothes and keepsakes. The acrid smell filled the air, but it felt cathartic. I struck a match and threw it onto the heap. Flames roared to life, consuming the remnants of my old life with Ella. I watched the fire burn, feeling a sense of finality and liberation. As the flames died down, I got into my car and drove away, leaving behind the ashes of a life that no longer served me. It was time for a fresh start, a new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. My wedding dress. I was about to light the fire when the phone rang. "Hi," I said calmly, trying to mask the turmoil brewing inside me. "What's going on, Jake?" Ella yelled into the phone, her voice laced with panic and anger. "What do you mean, Ella?" I replied sarcastically, knowing full well what was coming. "Don't play dumb, Jake," she continued, her frustration evident. "Calm down, Ella. What's going on?" I asked, feigning ignorance. There was a brief silence, and I could hear her breathing heavily. Her sister's voice echoed faintly in the background. "I was told you didn't bring me a new car. You sold mine." "Oh, yes. Did I forget to tell you that?" I said nonchalantly. "What are you talking about, Jake? What's going on?" Her voice started to rise in panic. "Well, from now on, if you need a car, you can pay for it yourself," I said, trying to maintain my composure, even as my heart raced. "I don't understand, Jake," she said, her voice meek and confused. "You heard me perfectly well, Ella. If you want it, you can buy it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to clean up the kitchen." "What? Is this some kind of sick joke?" she shouted, her voice trembling. I remained silent, listening to her panting as if she was pacing to her sister's car. The slamming of the car door confirmed it. I knew she was on her way. In this state, she could convince her sister to be here in 5 minutes. "Jake, Jake, Jake," she cried out. "Yes," I replied almost too calmly. "You said you were in our kitchen," she asked, suddenly realizing what I had said. "Yes. Why aren't you at work?" she demanded, her voice tinged with suspicion. I didn't respond. "Jake! Jake! Jake!" Her breath caught, and I could hear the panic and confusion in her voice. I hung up the phone as she continued to call out my name. I went outside, struck a match, and lit the fire. Our past flared up as I walked away. I pulled the marriage certificate out of my pocket, ripped it to shreds, and left it on the kitchen table, along with the only picture of us all vacationing at Disneyland. It was a wonderful time filled with many happy memories. I wondered if she thought the same. I got in the car and drove away. When I reached the end of the street, I saw Ella and Jennifer pull up to the house in my rearview mirror. Neither of them looked up. They just ran into the house. I turned off my phone, smiled, and pulled away. The A3 was practically empty as I drove towards my new home. Despite the sense of liberation, a feeling of dread lingered. I knew this wasn't the last time I'd see Ella, and once my plan came to fruition, she would do anything to hunt me down and make me pay. That was the kind of person she was. I also knew she'd get the girls involved, and I didn't want them to be burdened with our problems, especially since they needed to focus on their studies. I arrived in Sutton by 4 o'clock in the afternoon and decided I had time to visit the local phone store to get a new cell phone contract. I also managed to catch the administration team at work processing my P45 and met Freya, my new receptionist. She was quite young, but maintained a very professional demeanor, a complete contrast to Olivia. I returned to my new apartment, feeling a mix of anticipation and uncertainty about the future, which was completely empty. I had water and electricity, so I found a kettle I had brought with me from home and made a cup of tea. The warmth of the tea was comforting amidst the stark emptiness of my new apartment. I moved my stuff in and ordered a pizza, the perfect simple meal for the chaotic first night. I picked up my old cell phone and turned it on. The connection was broken. I smiled to myself, knowing that Ella was now without her phone too, and that should give the girls some respite before I could talk to them. I found my sleeping bag and spread it out in the living room and waited for dinner. I was supposed to have some furniture delivered over the weekend, but for now, I was glad to at least be away from Ella. While I waited, I turned on my laptop and reviewed the voice recordings I'd made in Jack Walker's office. I downloaded the contents and listened carefully, confirming that I had incriminating evidence of his infidelity to Olivia. I took 2 flash drives and made multiple copies. I wrote the addresses of Margaret Walker, Jack's wife, and Peter Lewis, Olivia's boyfriend, and then inserted a thumb drive into each. I'll send them off tomorrow before work, ensuring that both of them would soon know the truth. Finally, I decided to call my daughter Sophie to give her the latest news and to make sure she didn't let their mother know where I was. To my surprise, she admitted that she hadn't even talked to her mother yet. My guess was correct. She didn't have a phone to do that. Within a week, I had managed to furnish my apartment, and with no time to waste at work, I contacted Walker Engineering's clients and persuaded them to switch to Sutton. They saw what we were offering and very quickly jumped ship. A couple of people decided to stay with Jack, but most hated him and only tolerated him because of the superior products we offered. I knew Jack wouldn't immediately understand why his business was losing customers, but I didn't care. I also knew that now that my old house had all the utilities shut off, Ella would realize I wasn't coming back. There was no way she could afford to pay the bills, so I knew that Toby could safely begin the selling process. Sarah was more than happy to take on the task, and by the end of the week, the house had signs up. It was at this time that Ava contacted me. Apparently, Ella had moved into her parents' house, and they were not happy that their little princess had become a cheater. Ella, of course, was out for my blood and was furious at what I had done to her. Strangely, I found great satisfaction in it, but I knew it wasn't over yet. By the weekend, I was invited to another dinner party at Toby and Sarah's house. I was told that Amy would be there and that she had asked Sarah about me. I learned that she had gotten divorced a few years ago and had been single since her husband left her a year before the divorce. Apparently, the divorce went well. She got the house and full custody of the children, as well as financial support. Unfortunately, she has been skeptical of men ever since. Sarah told her about my situation, and she's wanted to meet me ever since. That's why they planned this dinner party. She was 2 years younger than me and had 2 older teenage children. I felt like I was being set up, but figured it couldn't hurt. The dinner was a success, and I felt completely relaxed for the first time since I'd thought about running away from Ella. Amy understood what I was going through, didn't push me or make me feel uncomfortable. We got drunk, danced together, and at the end of the night, we exchanged numbers. As I drove back to my new apartment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in a long while, I felt optimistic about the future. I knew there were still challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was stronger and more resilient than I had ever given myself credit for. The journey wasn't over, but I was ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. She told me to call if I needed someone to talk to, and I thanked her. I slept in the spare room at Toby's house, but it was getting harder and harder to fight the hangover, and the coffee wasn't helping. Sunday morning brought a breath of fresh air along with good news. Just a week after putting the house up for sale, I received 2 serious offers. One of them I immediately accepted for £550,000. Although I knew it could take some time before the deal was finalized, I agreed to the money as soon as it was ready. I planned to open an ISA in the girls' names and then ask Toby to distribute the remaining amount between numerous investment funds. I would also return the borrowed money to him and keep some in a home safe for emergencies. I still felt the need to protect myself. Another week went by, and I was elated to hear from Toby that the sale could proceed very quickly. I contacted the moving company and instructed them to clear out my old house. The girls called their mother and asked if she needed anything, which only made her more furious and threatening. I promised the girls that it would be over soon. On Tuesday morning, I was talking to one of our new customers who was meeting with Jack Walker about a possible supply contract extension. He informed Jack that he was moving to Sutton Engineering, and Jack was not surprised. He learned that Walker Engineering had to cut 50% of their staff due to the loss of contracts. He also informed me that Mrs. Walker was divorcing Jack due to his adultery. I had absolutely no sympathy for Jack, as I counted commission checks in my head during our conversation. I had no idea what had happened to Olivia and her boyfriend, but I knew he received my little gift just as Mrs. Walker had received hers. Even if she didn't know immediately, she was soon to find out why Mrs. Walker was divorcing her husband. I wondered what Olivia's friends and family would think about her cheating with an old man. To reward me for all my new work, I was given a brand new Land Rover Discovery HSE. I had been thinking of treating myself, but Robert and the bosses were so pleased with my performance and the way the company was progressing that they gifted me the car along with a few £1,000s in commission. In fact, it totaled over £30,000. I was looking out my office window admiring my new car when a familiar Ford Focus pulled into the parking lot. I froze, realizing who it belonged to. It was Diana's car, Ella's mom. I sat back in my chair and waited for the inevitable call. The confrontation I had been dreading had finally arrived. The phone rang in my office, and I picked it up. "Mr. Price, there's a woman sitting in the waiting room who claims to be your wife," said Freya, my secretary. "Tell her I have a meeting, and I'll be down in an hour," I replied. 3 hours later, I looked out the window and saw she was still sitting there. I exhaled noisily and decided it was time to leave for the night. If she saw me, I'd have to deal with it, and if she didn't, I'd just drive past. It wasn't like she knew which car to pay attention to. I gathered my things, took a deep breath, and walked out of my office. As I approached the parking lot, I saw Diana glance up, recognition dawning on her face. Our eyes met, and I steeled myself for the encounter. I had known this moment would come, and now it was time to face it head on. I walked out the side door and headed to my car. I was just getting into my car when I heard tires screeching. Before I knew it, Ella had pulled up and was blocking my way. She jumped out of the car and stormed over to me with a face like thunder. She looked like hell. Her clothes were clearly her sister's old cast-offs, and her hair looked like it hadn't been brushed in weeks. "You bastard," she screamed, hurling a slap in my direction but missing. "I hate you. I hate you." "Yeah, I hate you too, Ella. Now say what you want to say, and then get out of my life," I said, trying to stay calm. She just looked at me with tears rolling down her cheeks. "You ruined my life, you bastard," she whispered pitifully. I didn't say anything, just kept listening. "You destroyed all my belongings, my wedding dress, my clothes. You canceled everything and forced me to move in with Mom and Dad," she continued. "You ruined everything." Her complaints were all about her, and I wasn't surprised. She just stared at me, waiting for me to speak. "Is that all, Ella?" I asked. "Haven't you anything to say for yourself?" she shouted. I thought for a second before inviting her into my car. She was taken aback, but I didn't want to be a public spectacle any longer. When we sat down, I saw how bad she looked. She seemed to have aged, and I wondered if all that plus the venereal disease had taken its toll on her appearance. "Please come home, Jake. We can put all this behind us. I forgive you." What did she just say? Were my ears deceiving me? "You forgive me?" I asked, hoping I'd misheard. "Yes, Jake, I will forgive you for destroying my things and my life." "Are you delirious, Ella?" I asked. She just looked at me like I was the crazy one. "You openly cheat on me and disrespect me when I give you everything, and you have the nerve to say you forgive me." But I thought, "No, Ella, you're only thinking of yourself. I'll never be with you again, so go away and be with one of your lovers," I said coldly. She moved awkwardly in her chair, and I realized. "I suppose once you suddenly became single, they didn't need you?" I asked. "They accused me of giving them an STD and said I was just having a little fun. They said they would never want to have me as a girlfriend because I'm a cheating bitch." For a second, I almost felt sorry for her, but she had already made her bed. "Well, that was obvious, Ella, so go find someone else. My girlfriends have started treating me differently. Now we've broken up, and their husbands have started questioning their fidelity, which means I've been kicked to the curb. They see me as a bad influence. Can you believe it? The word separation stuck in my head. I knew it meant that I was still connected to her, but there was no turning back now. "It's over, Ella. You need to accept that and move on," I said firmly. Her eyes filled with tears again. "Please, Jake, give me another chance. I can change, I swear." "I've heard enough," I said, opening the car door and stepping out. "Goodbye, Ella. Don't contact me again." As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new chapter. I walked out the side door and headed to my car. Just as I was getting in, I heard tires screeching. Before I knew it, Ella had pulled up and blocked my way. She jumped out of the car and stormed over, her face contorted with rage. She looked terrible, wearing what were clearly her sister's old clothes, and her hair looked like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. "You bastard," she screamed, swinging a slap that missed. "I hate you, I hate you." "Yeah, I hate you too, Ella. Now say what you want to say and then get out of my life," I said, trying to stay calm. She just looked at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You ruined my life, you bastard," she whispered pitifully. I stayed silent, letting her continue. "You destroyed all my belongings, my wedding dress, my clothes. You canceled everything and forced me to move in with Mom and Dad," she continued. "You ruined everything." It was all about her, as usual. She just stared at me, waiting for me to speak. "Is that all, Ella?" I asked. "Haven't you anything to say for yourself?" she shouted. I thought for a second before inviting her into my car. She was taken aback, but got in, and we sat down. I saw how bad she looked up close. She seemed to have aged a decade, and I wondered if the venereal disease had taken its toll on her appearance. "Please come home, Jake. We can put all this behind us. I forgive you." What did she just say? Were my ears deceiving me? "You forgive me?" I asked, hoping I'd misheard. "Yes, Jake, I will forgive you for destroying my things in my life." "Are you delirious, Ella?" I asked. She just looked at me like I was the crazy one. "You openly cheat on me and disrespect me when I give you everything, and you have the nerve to say you forgive me?" But I thought, "No, Ella, you're only thinking of yourself. I'll never be with you again, so go away and be with one of your lovers," I said coldly. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I suppose once you suddenly became single, they didn't need you?" I asked. "They accused me of giving them an STD and said I was just having a little fun. They said they would never want to have me as a girlfriend because I'm a cheating bitch." For a second, I almost felt sorry for her, but she had already made her bed. "Well, that was obvious, Ella, so go find someone else. My girlfriends have started treating me differently. Now we've broken up, and their husbands have started questioning their fidelity, which means I've been kicked to the curb. They see me as a bad influence. Can you believe it?" The word separation stuck in my head. I knew it meant that I was still connected to her, but there was no turning back now. "It's over, Ella. You need to accept that and move on," I said firmly. Her eyes filled with tears again. "Please, Jake, give me another chance. I can change, I swear." "I've heard enough," I said, opening the car door and stepping out. "Goodbye, Ella. Don't contact me again." As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new chapter. My parents are disgusted, and everyone in town has heard about my venereal disease, no doubt thanks to my so-called friends and lovers. And now some of the factory employees have lost their jobs, and that's my fault too, she lamented. The truth was that she was partly to blame for all the bad things that had happened to her, but I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. She had messed up and was paying the price, but how great that price was. She had a beautiful life, and she ruined it because of greed and disrespect. However, I knew I had to move on with my life. "I have nothing left, Jake. I need you, and I want you back in my life. I have no money, no job. When will I get my share of the house?" she pleaded. "You've never once told me you love me. You just need me, Ella, and I don't need you." "As for the house, I didn't pay the mortgage, and I lost it," I lied. Her eyes widened, and her jaw dropped. She was shocked by my words, but at least I knew how this visit would turn out. "I want a divorce," I said. "No, please, Jake, of course I love you. Over 20 years together, and I made a little mistake, and you're burning me out. A very big, unforgivable mistake, Ella, and I'm never coming home to you." "Please, Jake," she shouted, her screams echoing throughout the car. "I need a clean break, and if you agree, I'll give you £30,000 in cash." I offered. I saw her face change, and the tears were replaced by a new determination. "No," she shouted. "I will fight you in court for everything. There's no way you'll lose the house. You're too smart for that." Damn it, she was right, and now I'm on her hind legs. "All right, Ella, I'll say this," I began. "You're never going to get a penny from me." She moved her hips and leaned forward toward me. "I'll fight you for everything and more, Jake. You don't have any money, Ella, and I'll move my assets around so much that you'll spend a fortune trying to find the money. I'm smart, so by the time your lawyer finds it, you'll have run up a bill that will negate any benefit. I suggest you take the money I'm offering, or I'll give it away too." "It's up to you," I said sternly, keeping my eyes on her. "You bastard! I loved you and bore you children, and this is how you treat me," she said angrily. "Thanks to me, our girls will go far. They won't be liars and cheats. They'll be selfless, not selfish like their mother. So take the money and get out of my life." My anger started to surface, and she looked at me like I was a stranger. "All right," she hissed. "I'll take the money and agree to the divorce." "Okay, I'll set it up." With those words, she got out of my car and slammed the door shut. A few seconds later, she sped out of the parking lot. The next day, I filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, and a week later, I arranged to meet Ella at the girl's apartment. The sale of my house went through, but I wouldn't put any money into it until the papers were signed. We tried to be polite in front of the girls, but it wasn't easy. I handed Ella the money, and she signed the papers. I kissed the girls goodbye and wished Ella good luck. When I was about to leave, she burst into tears again, but I had a feeling it was for the girls' benefit. Sophie and Ava looked at me and raised their eyebrows. They knew. "I'll see you next weekend, Dad," Ava said as I walked to the door. I went back into the room. Ella was still sobbing, and no one was paying attention to her. I suddenly realized what Ava was talking about. "Oh, yeah, the Coldplay concert. Everyone's looking forward to it. Are we going to meet you in London or drive together?" asked Sophie. "I'll talk to Amy and let you know during the week," I said one last time before I left. On my way out the door, I heard Ella yelling something, but I chose to ignore it and left.